The soft afternoon sunlight stretched across the runway, glimmering on the silver fuselage of the waiting luxury jet. Every detail had been meticulously prepared, from the red carpet leading to the aircraft stairs to the driver in a polished uniform, opening the car door with gloved hands. The atmosphere was quiet, yet radiated luxury, power, and unmistakable social division. From the glossy black SUV, a woman stepped out. No bodyguards, no swarming reporters. Just her Ariana Jefferson in a deep navy blazer, matching slacks and sleek black leather shoes. Her hair was neatly tied back at the nape of her neck, her face free from heavy makeup. Yet her features were sharp and elegant. She didn't need her appearance to prove anything. She wasn't trying to impress. She simply walked with the air of someone used to existing in spaces others only dreamed of entering. The aircraft's stairway descended smoothly. Ariana stepped onto each stair as though time didn't exist, slow, steady, composed. Her eyes scanned the cabin briefly as she entered. Everything was refined, cream-colored leather seats with hand-stitched edges, soft golden lighting across the ceiling, and a faint whiff of perfume lingering in the air, as if one were stepping into a five-star hotel in the sky. She wasn't surprised, but she didn't act overly familiar either. Ariana simply observed. No one noticed her arrival, not a single lingering glance. Or if there was, it was a fleeting, indifferent one. However, one person did notice and paid attention. The chief flight attendant, Vanessa Blake, is likely in her early 40s, blonde hair in a tidy updo, uniform pressed to perfection. She stood near the entrance to the cabin, greeting passengers with a standard smile, warm to the wealthy, cold to those not her type. And when her eyes landed on Ariana, that smile vanished instantly. "Welcome," Vanessa said, her voice flat like a memorized line. No nod, no eye contact, no customary pleasantries. Ariana gave a slight nod in return. No reaction to the attitude. She wasn't surprised nor offended, just accustomed. Behind Ariana came Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, a middle-aged white couple, frequent flyers in business class. Vanessa's demeanor transformed completely. Her smile reappeared instantly. Her tone shifted to warmth and familiarity. "Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, so lovely to have you both again. Still apple juice for you, ma'am, and an espresso for you, sir." Ariana took her seat near the window without turning back, but she heard it all. She sensed every tonal shift, every subtle gesture, the fake sweetness reserved for some, and the hollow coldness dealt to others. She wasn't angry. She wasn't irritated. She simply sat in silence, gently pulling down her sleeve, smoothing it, then quietly placing her leather bag under the seat. No excess movement. Every gesture measured like a slow melody with deliberate rhythm. Vanessa continued down the aisle. Whenever she reached a white passenger, she lingered longer, asked polite questions, and smiled just the right amount. But when she passed Ariana, she simply moved on. No offer of a warm towel, no offer of water, not even a second glance. At the back of the cabin, Emily, a junior flight attendant, noticed something wasn't right. She was young, barely 2 years into the job, but sensitive enough to feel discomfort at small acts of injustice. Her hands tightened slightly around the stack of service materials. As she watched, Vanessa breezed past Ariana without stopping. She wanted to step forward but hesitated. Ariana, meanwhile, had opened her phone, scanning an internal document, but her gaze drifted toward the window to the clouds lazily floating beyond the glass. To most, this flight was just another luxury journey, but to Ariana Jefferson, this wasn't merely a trip, it was a test, a quiet moral examination to see how people behave when they think they're above others. And perhaps, she had already identified the first person to fail the test. Her name was Vanessa. The familiar ding rang through the cabin, signaling the aircraft had reached cruising altitude. The skylights began to open, and soft light spilled into the cabin, reflecting off the gilded edges of the luxury interior. Everything seemed perfect, or at least looked like it was. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and began to recline in relaxation. The first glasses of champagne were poured, the clink of crystal mingling with soft conversation, a symphony reserved for the privileged. Vanessa Blake, with precision in every step, began her inspection of the passenger cabin. She carried a tray of sparkling water in crystal glasses, her eyes scanning each guest, each gesture not out of care, but to evaluate. When she reached the Callahan's row, she slightly bowed, her voice sweet as syrup. "Mr. Callahan, I made sure to bring your preferred espresso. And for you, Mrs. Callahan, organic unsweetened apple juice, as always." Mrs. Callahan smiled gently, while Mr. Callahan gave an approving nod. Such warmth, when directed at the right targets, created a sense of friendliness. But when that warmth was selectively offered, it became plain discrimination. And that was exactly what Ariana was witnessing. As Vanessa approached Ariana's row, her facial expression and tone changed abruptly, as if someone had cut the scene mid-frame. No smile, no warmth, no trace of courtesy. Vanessa passed by as if Ariana were space. No questions asked, no eye contact, not even, "Would you like something to drink?" Ariana tilted her head slightly, her gaze not accusatory, just observant. She'd experienced this too many times. Moments where people pretended not to see her, or worse, acted as if they had seen her, but chose to deny her presence. Because of her skin color. Because they believed she didn't belong. Across the cabin, a young woman in designer clothes, her hair bleached and sunglasses on despite being indoors, looked toward Ariana with a scrutinizing expression. She whispered to her companion, "Weird. Doesn't look like someone who belongs in this class." The man beside her, a middle-aged man in a gray suit, didn't respond. He glanced briefly at Ariana, then shook his head. Not in agreement, but in disappointment. He'd once believed those thoughts belonged to the past, but clearly, they never truly left. Ariana didn't react. She kept her posture straight, hands resting lightly on her lap. Every motion calm and refined, like a gentle jazz melody among sharp, boastful notes surrounding her. Emily, the junior flight attendant, was still watching. She wasn't particularly assertive, but she had a conscience, and her heart beat faster as she saw the quiet injustice unfolding before her. She saw Vanessa ignore Ariana, saw the cold eyes, and saw the strange calm of the woman sitting there. Vanessa had now returned to the front of the cabin. She adjusted her hair, straightened her posture, and scanned the cabin again. When she saw Ariana still seated calmly, without complaint or expression, a strange discomfort stirred in her. Why wasn't the woman reacting? Why didn't she stand up, complain, and demand to be treated fairly? Perhaps Vanessa was hoping for that. A single complaint, a moment of resistance, would give her an excuse to escalate. But Ariana's serenity had upended every script Vanessa had in mind, and in her head, Vanessa began forming a simple conclusion. This woman doesn't belong here. She didn't say it aloud, but her eyes said it all. And that was only the beginning. Ariana slowly turned toward the window. White clouds drifted peacefully below. The sky was a perfect, undisturbed blue, so calm it felt unreal. But inside that magnificent jet, a storm was quietly forming. Not in the skies, but in people's hearts. And to Ariana Jefferson, this was no surprise. Because she knew well, silence is sometimes the most powerful form of resistance. The flight continued under a surface of calm, but beneath that gilded shell, a current was beginning to stir. Vanessa Blake, the head flight attendant, walked up from the back of the cabin, her eyes passing over Ariana Jefferson once again. She paused. Several minutes had gone by, and Ariana still sat quietly in her first-class seat alone, without flashy accessories, without any visible signs that she belonged among the elite. And that unsettled Vanessa in a strangely visceral way. The class-based instincts inside her flared. This black woman, she thought, didn't look like she belonged here. Not a frequent flyer. No one recognized her. No casual smiles were exchanged with other crew or passengers. And most of all, none of the air of someone who commands respect. Vanessa walked over, no longer subtle, no longer cautious. She stopped in front of Ariana and offered a tight-lipped, forced smile. "Ma'am," she said, emphasizing each word as if forcing professionalism, "I believe you're sitting in the wrong seat." Ariana looked up from her book, her gaze gentle but resolute. "I don't believe I am," she replied calmly. "This is my seat." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. The smile disappeared. This row is reserved for elite passengers, she said, her tone sharpening. And as far as I know, you're not on that list. Ariana set her book softly on her lap and exhaled slowly. I suggest you check the passenger list again. My name is Ariana Jefferson. The serenity in Ariana's voice did nothing to soothe Vanessa. On the contrary, it made her feel challenged, and no one, especially someone she deemed unfit, had the right to push back. I don't need to check, Vanessa snapped, lips pressed tight. I've worked here for over 10 years. I know who's who. The atmosphere in the cabin began to shift. A few nearby passengers started to notice. The middle-aged man in the gray suit who had been quietly observing since takeoff now set his glass down and leaned slightly forward. The young blonde woman in sunglasses straightened in her seat, eyes brimming with curiosity. A passenger behind them whispered, "What's going on? Did that woman sneak into first class?" Vanessa, sensing a swell of support, straightened her posture. Her voice rose just enough for everyone nearby to hear. If you don't return to your assigned seat, I'll have no choice but to alert security upon landing. Ariana didn't flinch. She kept her tone soft, her eyes calm. As I said, I'm not moving, and if verification is needed, I'm willing to wait. Vanessa's face flushed, whether from anger or the shifting stares of the passengers. It wasn't clear. For a moment, uncertainty flickered, but pride hardened through years of unchecked authority pushed her to escalate. You're causing a disturbance, Vanessa hissed. I'm calling for assistance. She turned toward Emily, the junior attendant standing near the galley, and pointed directly at Ariana. Emily, escort her to economy. Emily flinched. She hesitated, her eyes wide as they darted between Vanessa and Ariana. Something wasn't right. The woman up to this point hadn't raised her voice, hadn't broken any rules, hadn't crossed any lines. She had simply been firm. Emily swallowed hard, her hands clenching her passenger log. She spoke up quietly but clearly. Maybe we should double-check the list? Vanessa whipped around, her voice sharp as a blade. I already told you. I'm the supervisor here. No need to check anything. Ariana tilted her head slightly, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. That's unfortunate, she said softly, because you may have just made the biggest mistake of your career. Vanessa scoffed. A mistake? For the following protocol? Ariana didn't respond. She simply pulled out her phone, opened an internal app, and sent a single message. Once it was sent, she placed the phone down on the armrest. Her expression unchanged, her gaze still gentle. But in her eyes, there was something that made the entire cabin hold its breath. Vanessa had no idea what was about to unfold. She had just triggered a domino effect, and the next pieces would fall faster than she ever imagined. The air inside the aircraft cabin had thickened like a storm looming just beyond the horizon. Passengers remained silent, but their eyes kept drifting toward the row where Ariana Jefferson sat. She was still composed, as if nothing had happened, but that very stillness had become the center of every gaze. Vanessa Blake, perfectly dressed in her uniform, face flawlessly made up, marched briskly toward the galley. The confusion stirring inside her had hardened into irritation and wounded pride. She needed to reclaim control. In the fastest way, force the woman to retreat with a move that looked subtle. Only minutes later, Vanessa returned with a tray of cold water, each crystal glass filled, sparkling, lined up precisely on a silver tray. Her eyes flicked toward Ariana, who was quietly reading a book, one leg extended slightly into the aisle completely unintentionally, not obstructing anyone. But to Vanessa, it was an opportunity. She adjusted her grip on the tray, walked quickly, and deliberately veered closer to Ariana, and just as scripted, her shoe clipped Ariana's foot. A slight bump, but enough for the tray to tilt. Water from every glass spilled directly onto Ariana, soaking her elegant blazer and tailored trousers. A small gasp escaped from a nearby passenger. No one could say for sure whether it was an accident, but Vanessa's expression, that smirk, half smile, half satisfaction, said everything. Then, as if the accident had been Ariana's fault, Vanessa barked, "You should watch where you put your feet. You spilled water all over yourself." Ariana inhaled deeply. She didn't leap up. She didn't rush to wipe herself down. She simply closed her book, set it down carefully, and looked up at Vanessa. I was seated properly, not moving. You stepped into me. Her voice was soft, devoid of anger. But in her eyes there was a calm that cut like glass. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, her tone dripping with mockery. So now you're blaming me? You took someone else's seat, blocked the aisle, and now you're pointing fingers? A whisper rose from behind. She did that on purpose. That was obvious. Ariana didn't respond immediately. She gently brushed the water off her blazer, then looked up. And for the first time, there was a light in her eyes that couldn't be ignored. I'm simply asking to be treated the same as every other passenger on this flight. If that's too much for you, then perhaps you're the one who doesn't belong here. The cabin fell silent, not because her words were harsh, but because they were true, too clear, and far too dangerous for someone like Vanessa, who had already gone too far. And then, as if every remaining boundary had snapped, Vanessa lost control. Who do you think you are to speak to me like that? She hissed. And then, slap! The sound cracked through the cabin like thunder. Passengers turned in shock, too stunned to react. Vanessa's hand had landed squarely on Ariana's cheek. But what truly left people frozen was Ariana's reaction. She didn't stand. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Ariana simply turned her body slightly, adjusted her posture, and raised her gaze to Vanessa, calm but with an edge as sharp as a razor. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Vanessa stepped back, a flicker of uncertainty finally surfacing in her eyes. At the back of the cabin, Emily, the young flight attendant, clutched her hand over her mouth in shock. Passengers around them stirred. Some murmured, "She had no right to hit her." Others were already pulling out their phones, recording the entire scene. The middle-aged man who had watched silently from the beginning now stood, gently placed a hand on Ariana's seat and asked, "Are you all right, ma'am?" Ariana turned to him, nodded softly. "I'm all right, thank you." Vanessa now realized the tide had turned, but instead of backing down, she tried one more desperate push. "You've been disruptive and aggressive. You shouldn't have been in this cabin to begin with." Ariana didn't reply. Instead, like a final move in a game already decided, she picked up her phone once more and sent one short message. No one knew who she was messaging, but the way she set the phone down afterward, calm, deliberate, unshaken, left no doubt in anyone's mind. This woman was not ordinary. People in the cabin began exchanging looks. Vanessa, for the first time, felt the creeping chill of fear rising in her throat. That slap, what was supposed to be the final blow against a non-standard passenger, became the question mark that ignited doubt. The entire first-class cabin sat in a strange silence. No one spoke, but everyone knew. This had gone too far. Vanessa Blake, the woman in charge of the cabin, stood, breathing heavily beside Ariana's seat, her eyes still flashing with indignation. But if one looked closely, there was something else rising behind the fury. Worry. She was beginning to sense it now. Ariana's calmness wasn't submission. She had just slapped a black woman whose identity she didn't know in front of dozens of witnesses, and now someone among them was recording. And Ariana had sent two messages. Vanessa turned away, pretending to be busy, but her mind was spinning. She glanced at the passengers, none of whom looked at her with trust anymore. What she saw instead was doubt and expectation. Emily, the junior attendant, stood frozen near the galley. Both hands clutched the passenger manifest, her eyes darting between Vanessa and Ariana. She wanted to do the right thing, but the truth was already coming. Nothing could stop it now. Less than 5 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out. He looked to be in his early 50s in full airline uniform, name badge on his chest. Captain R. Henderson. But today his eyes didn't carry the usual polite ease of a man greeting passengers. He walked quickly into the cabin. No greetings, no smiles. Vanessa spotted him and frowned, stepping toward him. "Captain, is there a problem?" He didn't answer immediately. He stopped in front of her, then lowered his voice, but just enough that those nearby could still hear. "I just received a call from the airline's senior executive office. There's a very important passenger on this flight." Vanessa's brow furrowed. "You mean, who?" The captain turned slightly, his gaze falling directly on Ariana, still seated calmly, like a living statue, her eyes never leaving the open book in her lap. Ms. Ariana Jefferson, he said, enunciating each word, is the legal owner of this private aircraft. She is also the CEO and founder of the airline we're working for. That sentence exploded through the quiet like a bomb. A woman in the front row gasped. The middle-aged man who had crossed his arms from the beginning now simply nodded as if, at last, things had fallen into place. Emily covered her mouth, eyes welling, not clear whether from emotion or shame for her colleague. And Vanessa Wan stood paralyzed, her face flushed red, then pale, then ashen gray. Her eyes darted wildly, clearly unable to believe what she had just heard. "No, that's not possible," she whispered. "She's just a black woman in simple clothes," the captain cut in, voice steady and deliberate. "Well, that woman is the one who invested in, built, and now runs the very system you're employed by." Vanessa took a step back, as if someone had just slapped her in return. Only now did Ariana slowly close her book and rise from her seat. She adjusted the collar of her blazer and took 2 steps forward. Not rushed, not theatrical, not prideful. Only with the poise of someone who had passed through countless storms of prejudice and pain to reach a place others could barely imagine. She looked directly at Vanessa, who now seemed to melt into the floor like a crumbling statue. "You don't need to be afraid," Ariana said, her voice soft, yet chilling. "I don't need fear, I need fairness. But you lost that chance. When you couldn't offer even the basic respect to a passenger just because she appeared ordinary." Vanessa opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Her hands trembled, eyes pleading, but no one in the cabin met her gaze. And then, the captain spoke as a firm voice, leaving no room for negotiation. "We will be making an emergency landing to address this incident. Ms. Blake, you are hereby relieved of duty immediately. Airport police have been notified." Vanessa stood still, not out of shock, but because she knew this was beyond saving. The air inside the cabin was no longer tense. It had shifted into something else entirely. Shock and silence. All the passengers remained frozen in their seats, as if afraid that moving even slightly would shatter the surreal reality unfolding before them. But this wasn't a dream. Ariana Jefferson, the woman who had been dismissed, doused in water, and slapped in front of everyone, was now standing in the aisle, her face composed, her eyes carrying the icy clarity of someone who held the fate of the very plane they were on. Opposite her, Vanessa Blake was no longer the proud chief flight attendant. Her face had gone pale, her eyes hollow. She leaned lightly against the cabin wall, as if searching for something to hold on to. Some last shred of dignity that hadn't yet slipped through her fingers. Suddenly, the intercom crackled. Captain Henderson's voice came through. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an onboard incident, we will be making an emergency landing at the nearest airport to coordinate with the proper authorities. Please remain in your seats and keep your seatbelts fastened." A quiet sigh echoed from somewhere. Someone placed their hand to their forehead, someone else closed their eyes, and a few pulled out their phones and pressed record, because they knew they had just witnessed a real-life courtroom drama in the sky about justice and the illusion of power. The aircraft tilted slightly as it began its descent. Objects in the cabin trembled ever so gently. Ariana returned to her seat. She crossed her hands over her lap, eyes steady and unblinking. She didn't need to do anything else. The truth was doing the rest. Vanessa still stood there, unable to turn back, unable to walk away. She began muttering under her breath. Barely audible words meant more for herself than anyone else. "I didn't know. I didn't mean to. I just..." But no one was listening anymore. 13 minutes later, the private jet touched down smoothly at a nearby civilian airport. There was no applause. Only an eerie stillness, as if everyone on board knew that the consequences were waiting just beyond the cabin door. Within minutes of the plane stopping, a sleek black SUV sped down the runway and pulled up beside the mobile staircase. The door opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, faces serious, eyes sweeping toward the aircraft. Walking beside them was a woman in a gray blazer, the legal representative of the airline. The very one founded and run by Ariana Jefferson. The captain signaled for the door to be opened. Ariana remained seated. She didn't rise, didn't step forward. She allowed the system she built to function on its terms. Vanessa Blake, now a shadow of herself, stood frozen in fear. She had never imagined a day would come where her name would be called out like this, on a flight where she once commanded every last detail. The officers entered the cabin. One spoke in a deep, steady voice. "Ms. Vanessa Blake, you are under arrest for assaulting a passenger on Flight 57H. We have received a formal complaint from the legal owner of this aircraft, Ms. Ariana Jefferson." Vanessa was stunned. "No, wait, I didn't mean to. I didn't even know who she was." "Exactly," the lawyer interrupted coldly. "You didn't care who she was, and that's why you're here now." The officers stepped forward, clearly read her Miranda rights, and handcuffed Vanessa right there, in the aisle, in front of dozens of witnesses. The sound of the cuffs clicking was colder than the drone of the engines. Ariana didn't look back. She simply closed her eyes for a beat, then opened them, still calm. But now everyone in the cabin knew. This moment would be etched into memory forever. As Vanessa was let off the plane, her footsteps heavy, her head bowed, not a single person came to her defense. There were no looks of sympathy from colleagues, no backup from authority. Her power had vanished. Just before crossing the threshold, Vanessa turned her eyes searching for forgiveness. Ariana stood and faced her voice low but sharp as a forged blade. "Forgiveness is a gift for those who acknowledge their wrongs and choose to change. You're only sorry because you got caught." The plane prepared for takeoff again after a 45-minute delay. Inside the cabin, no one had moved past the emotional aftershock. The middle-aged man turned to Ariana and for the first time smiled softly. "Thank you, not just for standing up for yourself, but for helping the rest of us re-examine how we see others." Ariana nodded. Her eyes didn't carry pride, only a quiet message. Justice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be seen, at the right time, in the right place. The plane had taken off again, gliding gently above the white clouds, leaving behind the runway, where Vanessa Blake had been handcuffed and led away in silence. Her absence left a noticeable void, not because she had been beloved, but because her presence had been a living symbol of how power, when stripped of ethics, turns into tyranny. In the first-class cabin, everyone sat in silence. But it was not discomfort. It was a reflection on behavior, on prejudice, and on how they had viewed a black woman in a navy blue blazer for the past 2 hours. Ariana Jefferson remained in her seat, but now everyone looked at her differently. There was no more suspicion, no more quiet judgment, only respect, and a deep, genuine admiration. A flight attendant approached quietly, placing a fresh glass of water before her and bowing slightly. "Ms. Jefferson, I'm deeply sorry for what happened." Ariana nodded in thanks. She knew it wasn't everyone's fault, but the silence of the many was often what enabled injustice to flourish. She slowly stood. No microphone, no intercom, just her calm voice and grounded gaze, yet the entire cabin paused. Everyone turned to her, as if awaiting someone to guide them through something greater than just a mid-air incident. Ariana stepped into the center aisle, her eyes scanning every face. Then she spoke, not loudly, but her words carried far. "I didn't stand up today just to reclaim a seat. I stood up to remind us all of something. Something simple, yet often forgotten. Respect. None of us chooses the color of our skin at birth, but we all have the choice to be kind, to be fair, to treat others with dignity." Some eyes welled with tears. Others nodded slowly. She continued, "I don't want to be treated differently because I'm a CEO. I want to be treated like any person should be, with humanity. Leadership isn't about a title on a badge. It's about actions. And today, someone demonstrated that beautifully." She turned toward the back of the cabin, where Emily, the junior attendant, still stood frozen, unable to believe what was unfolding. Ariana smiled a sincere, warm smile, like a beam of sunlight cutting through a dark cloud. "Emily, I saw you. I saw the worry in your eyes during everything that happened. I saw how you wanted to speak, even as your position and the pressure held you back. And because of that, I want you to know, quiet courage is still courage. Everyone in the cabin turned to look at Emily. The young woman nearly stopped breathing, her hands clenched, eyes brimming red. Ariana walked over, gently placed her hand on Emily's shoulder. "As soon as we land, my office will be in touch with you. I'd like to invite you to our headquarters and officially appoint you as assistant supervisor for flight attendant training. Not because you were brave, but because you have a heart. And I believe those with heart are the ones who will raise a generation of service rooted in kindness." Emily broke into tears, nodding again and again, unable to speak. Around them, the passengers began to clap. Not the polite kind clapping for a safe landing, but the kind that celebrates someone rekindling hope in a world too often masked by indifference. Ariana turned back, raised her head and addressed the entire cabin one last time, with a short but unforgettable sentence. "Never underestimate someone just because they don't show off. Sometime, the person sitting quietly beside you is the one holding all of our futures." In that moment, the atmosphere in the cabin transformed. No more barriers, no more doubts, only genuine admiration and respect that was finally, truly earned. The private jet slowly descended. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, casting a soft glow on the calm face of Ariana Jefferson, the woman who had just turned a first-class cabin into a courtroom for justice. The cabin was silent. No more whispering, no more judgmental glances, only profound respect and a quiet anticipation. Because everyone knew, when this plane touched down again, it wouldn't just mark an arrival, it would mark the beginning of something much greater. As the wheels hit the runway, the cabin broke into applause once more. But this time, it wasn't for the captain. It was for Ariana, for Emily, and for everything that had just been made right. The moment the aircraft came to a full stop, a media team and airline representatives were already waiting on the tarmac, standing in formal rows, eyes filled with anticipation. Outside, news of the incident had already begun to spread online. The video capturing the slap and Ariana's calm, powerful reaction had gone viral in less than 2 hours. A small red carpet had been rolled out, not for show, but because Ariana was the airline's highest executive. And today, more than ever, she stood as the living embodiment of a system she had built with her own hands. As she stepped down the aircraft stairs, Ariana wore no designer switch-out, no polished PR costume. She kept her same navy blue blazer, simple trousers, and neatly tied hair, because she knew true worth doesn't need rebranding. Her eyes paused on the microphone placed at the press podium. Camera flashes popped, lenses zoomed in on her, but she didn't blink. A female reporter called out first, "Ms. Jefferson, the incident on board has caused a public uproar. Do you have anything to say to the public?" Ariana stepped up, adjusted the mic. She looked around and began, her voice clear, sharp, and honest. "I'm not standing here to recount a slap. I'm standing here to speak about the silent slaps that millions endure every day. Slaps delivered through suspicious stares, condescending tones, and conditional service." The airport fell completely silent. Ariana continued, "I am the founder of this airline, and today I'm announcing a fundamental shift in how we serve people, starting not at the front desk, but from deep within, our mindset, our ethics, our internal culture. We are launching a new program called Dignity First. Every employee, from senior executives to interns, will undergo training in unconscious bias awareness, intercultural communication, and professional accountability." She paused, then spoke with quiet force. "Because I believe service doesn't begin with a smile. It begins with the heart." The crowd stood still. One photographer lowered his camera and clapped, then another. And then an entire row stood and applauded without end. Within 30 minutes of her speech, hashtags like "Shakir, respect above all," and "Dignity First" began trending across Twitter, Instagram, and news outlets. Competing airlines were suddenly under pressure to disclose their internal policies. International media declared it a moral earthquake in the aviation industry. After her address, Ariana didn't retreat to a VIP lounge. She walked straight to the operations staff area, where Emily stood in her old uniform, hands nervously fumbling, unsure where to place them. Ariana approached, locked eyes with her. "Now is the time for you to know. Even the smallest act of courage has value beyond measure. She handed Emily her official promotion letter and extended her hand. Emily broke into tears, unable to hold them back. But she grasped Ariana's hand, firmly, gratefully, and with the quiet confidence that she would never again be invisible. Ariana left the airport in an unmarked vehicle. No security detail, no PR parade. She didn't need a performance. Her actions had already spoken. But behind him, an industry was shifting. Every eye, every article, every person who watched that in-flight video was left with one thing: awakening. Less than 24 hours after the incident on Flight 57H went viral, social media erupted. On TikTok, the video showing Vanessa's slap and Ariana's calm, powerful response garnered over 15 million views overnight. On Twitter, the hashtag #ISTandWithAriana ranked among the top 3 national trends. On Facebook, human rights groups, customer service communities, and social justice forums simultaneously shared the story, accompanied by comments filled with outrage. A female CEO had to endure this just to be considered worthy? What about ordinary people? She didn't need to scream or retaliate, yet she made the entire system bow its head. Vanessa didn't just slap one woman, she slapped everyone who has ever been discriminated against and had no voice. Meanwhile, for Vanessa Blake, everything unfolded too fast to breathe. Within just 48 hours, her personal social media accounts were shut down due to overwhelming backlash. Her name appeared in every headline as a symbol of abusive power. The airline's legal office issued a notice of lawsuit for severe damage to brand image. And worst of all, she was summoned to local court, facing charges of passenger assault and systemic discriminatory behavior. She tried to defend herself. She said, "I didn't know who she was." But during a live broadcast, a reporter cut her off with a simple question. "So if you had known she was the CEO, would you have treated her differently?" That question required no answer. It became the most powerful indictment of all. At the same time, Ariana Jefferson wasn't appearing on talk shows. She wasn't chasing spotlights. Instead, she chose to return to her alma mater, the university that once gave her a full scholarship, where she had been the only black student in her law class. No cameras, no press, just a small classroom, a few dozen young students, and a whiteboard. Ariana stood in front of the class, wearing no designer brand, no heat LS, just a crisp white blouse, soft gray slacks, and the unshakable presence of someone who had earned every inch of the ground she stood on. "I came here today," she began, "not to talk about an airline, but to talk about your right to exist with dignity in every space you enter." She recounted the events on the plane, from the cold stairs to the spilled water, the slap, and perhaps most striking, the silence of those who said nothing in a moment that begged for someone to speak. The room froze. A young woman in the front row wiped her eyes. Ariana continued, "I used to be the invisible student, working night shifts, called the black girl serving water by rude guests. I was once rejected from interviews because my name didn't sound elite enough. But I never let that bitterness turn into hate for the world. Instead, I used it to build a system, one where service workers don't have to fake smiles to earn respect. And I want you, this next generation, to know. Equality isn't something someone gives you. It's something you have to claim, smartly, steadily, and with conviction." A male student stood up, voice trembling. "But what if that day you weren't the CEO? What would have happened then?" Ariana paused, then answered slowly, firmly. "Maybe I would have been removed from my seat. Maybe I would have been held back due to a misunderstanding. But that only proves why I have to do what I'm doing. Because if respect requires a title, what happens to those without power?" The classroom erupted in applause, then answered slowly, firmly, "Maybe I would have been removed from my seat. Maybe I would have been held back due to a misunderstanding. But that only proves why I have to do what I'm doing. Because if respect requires a title, what happens to those without power?" The classroom erupted in applause. But Ariana didn't smile in triumph. She simply turned her gaze to the whiteboard, where one student had written her words, "Respect is a right, not a reward." 2 weeks after the incident that shook the aviation industry, Ariana Jefferson boarded another flight. This time there were no cameras following her, no press waiting, and no one knew she was coming. She gave no prior notice, no special booking, no title of CEO, just a passenger named A. Jefferson, stepping into the cabin in a simple dark blazer, her hair neatly tied, and eyes quietly observing the world. But when she entered the first-class cabin, something made her pause. The look in the eyes of the crew. No one was surprised. No one scrambled to bow. Instead, they looked her straight in the eye with sincere respect. The flight attendant in charge, a Latin woman, stepped forward and gently said, "Welcome aboard, Miss Jefferson. It's truly an honor to serve you today." She wasn't discriminated against, but more importantly, she wasn't overcompensated either. Everything was measured, elegant, and professional, as if finally this industry had learned to treat passengers with heart, not based on appearance or assumption. Ariana took her seat, fastened her seatbelt, and turned toward the window. A young girl, maybe 10 years old, sat a row behind her, brown-skinned, in a small floral dress, quietly peeking through the gap between seats. Her mother gently tapped her shoulder. "Sweetie, don't stare." But Ariana turned, smiled softly, and tilted her head. "Do you like flying?" The little girl nodded shyly. "I want to be a pilot, but someone told me I never could." Ariana placed a hand on the armrest, her eyes meeting the child's, and said slowly, "If you're brave enough to dream, then this world will have to learn to make space for that dream, not the other way around." The little girl smiled. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, and no one knew a spark had just been lit. The plane took off, rising into the sky like any other flight. But for Ariana, this was the first time she truly felt she was flying, not because of power, but because of freedom. As she looked out the window, sunlight spilled across the screen of her phone, still open to a headline posted that morning. Over 1,200 airlines and service providers have signed on to Dignity First, an initiative launched by Ariana Jefferson to retrain all aviation personnel in service attitude, cultural awareness, and equitable conduct. Beneath it, a pinned comment from someone who had witnessed the slap that day. "I can't change the past, but thanks to her, I'll never stay silent again when I see injustice." Ariana folded the phone shut, her eyes closed, not to rest, but to thank herself for never once lowering her head in the face of disrespect. Lessons from this story. Respect is not a reward, it is a basic human right. No one should have to prove their worth just to be treated decently. Silence in the face of injustice is a form of complicity. Sometimes a single glance, a question, or a step forward can change the outcome of a life. True power doesn't come from title or status. It comes from the ability to maintain dignity when being torn down and to turn wounds into meaningful action. Change doesn't start with crowds. It begins with one person brave enough to say no at the right time, forcing the world to re-examine its moral compass. Leadership isn't about commanding. It's about being willing to step back, hand someone else the mic so that voices long buried can finally rise. The story doesn't end with applause, it ends with a quiet spark of hope. If each of us stands up at the right time, if we hold fast to our dignity, the world can become better, not through grand revolutions, but through millions of small, steadfast, courageous acts done right.